The Snedeker family arrived in their new Connecticut home with a sense of cautious optimism. Martin and Anna Snedeker, parents to 3 children, had sought a place removed from the bustle of town, a house where the children could play freely and the family could settle into a peaceful routine. The farmhouse, perched on a quiet lane and surrounded by dense woodlands, seemed perfect. Its wooden floors creaked gently, high ceilings promised airy rooms, and the faint scent of aged timber added an air of history and permanence. At first, the house was exactly what they had hoped for. Furniture was arranged, windows cleaned, and the children ran from room to room, their laughter echoing off the walls. But as the days passed, small oddities began to intrude upon the family's sense of normalcy. Doors left closed would be open the next morning. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. A cold draft would appear in the middle of summer, chilling the skin unexpectedly. Whispers drifted along the walls, fleeting, unintelligible, almost imperceptible, yet they carried the unmistakable weight of awareness. The children noticed first. Tommy, the youngest at 6, refused to enter certain rooms, claiming, "Someone is watching me." Margaret, 12, reported objects seeming to move on their own, shifting imperceptibly from where she had left them. Samuel, the oldest, initially scoffed at his siblings' fears, but even he could not ignore the strange occurrences. Shadows flickering across the walls, whispers brushing against his ears, and doors that would slam shut behind him with no wind to blame. The first incident that could not be rationalized occurred one evening in the kitchen. Anna Snedeker had been preparing dinner when a dining chair, previously stationary, toppled violently across the floor, striking the wall with a deafening crash. Startled, she rushed to check on the children, finding them huddled together in terror. When Martin arrived, he noticed the room had grown inexplicably cold, a localized chill that seemed to sink into the bones. The house, which had once felt warm and familiar, now seemed alive, responsive, and threatening. From that night forward, the activity escalated. Doors slammed with force sufficient to startle adults. Heavy furniture shifted across the floor, sometimes in broad sweeps, other times with precise, targeted movements. Windows rattled violently despite calm weather. Cold spots emerged unpredictably, freezing the air in pockets while the rest of the house remained unaffected. Strange noises, low groans, muffled bangs, whispers that seemed to echo names, filled the home. Even the family dog, usually protective and loyal, refused to enter certain rooms, growling at empty corners with hackles raised. The children's experiences intensified. Tommy would awaken screaming, claiming a dark figure had hovered at the foot of his bed. Margaret saw tall, faceless shadows standing silently in corners, sometimes moving slowly toward her before vanishing. Samuel attempted to confront the shapes, only to have objects thrown suddenly, forcing him to retreat. The family began to sleep in clusters, the children seeking safety in numbers, while the parents endured nights of half-sleep, heart racing, anticipating the next eruption of activity. Martin and Anna, rational and practical, began to document the events meticulously. Notes were kept detailing dates, times, locations, and witnesses present for each incident. They measured temperatures, inspected drafts, examined electrical wiring, and checked for structural issues. Nothing could account for the intensity, consistency, and intelligence behind the disturbances. The house seemed aware, reactive, almost sentient in its persistence. Every attempt to control or anticipate the events was met with escalation elsewhere, as if the phenomenon were observing and adapting. Neighbors, initially curious, began to take notice. They reported flickering lights at odd hours, loud crashes echoing through the empty house, and an oppressive atmosphere around the property. Some approached cautiously to witness the events, while others avoided the Snedeker home entirely. Rumors spread of a family living under a curse or plagued by spirits, heightening tension and leaving the Snedekers increasingly isolated. Early paranormal investigators soon arrived, equipped with notebooks, cameras, thermometers, and primitive recording devices, they sought to capture the unexplainable. What they documented was disturbing. Objects moving with no visible cause, doors opening and closing independently, shadows shifting against the flow of light, and whispers audible only on tape, often repeating names or phrases. Investigators describe an oppressive sense of observation, an awareness that went beyond mere phenomena, a force that tested courage, patience, and resolve. One particularly startling incident occurred during an evening investigation. A heavy chair rose off the floor, hovering briefly before crashing down. Simultaneously, a lamp toppled from a side table, shattering across the hardwood. A low, guttural whisper filled the room, repeating the names of the Snedeker children. The investigators, trained to remain composed, took careful notes, but even they acknowledged the presence had exceeded anything they had witnessed. The family, huddled together in fear, understood that their home had become a stage for an intelligent, malevolent force. Sleep deprivation compounded the family's suffering. The children were terrified of sleeping alone, and the parents experienced restless nights filled with fear and anticipation. Even daytime brought no reprieve. Shadows lingered at the edge of vision, objects shifted subtly when unattended, and whispers persisted. Meals were interrupted by flying utensils, collapsing chairs, or doors slamming with sudden force. The house no longer functioned as a safe living space. It had become a labyrinth of fear, unpredictability, and torment. Physical attacks became increasingly direct. Lamps shattered, furniture moved with precision aimed at family members, and windows rattled as though struck by an invisible hand. Children bore scratches or bruises without explanation. Mundane activities, dressing, bathing, eating, were constantly interrupted by sudden disturbances. The presence in the house displayed intelligence and intent, as if it were testing boundaries, learning patterns, and asserting dominance over the occupants. Investigators returned repeatedly, documenting consistent patterns. Cold spots appeared unpredictably, often following family members through the house. Objects moved in repetitive sequences, suggesting deliberate behavior. Whispers responded to questions, repeating names or phrases in distorted, chilling tones. Shadows shifted independently of light, at times appearing humanoid, then dissolving into darkness. The activity was precise, consistent, and undeniably intelligent. The Snedekers tried protective measures. Salt lines were sprinkled across doorways. Candles burned continuously, and prayers recited with fervor. Rooms were left empty for observation. Furniture was rearranged in hopes of disrupting patterns. Yet the house adapted, focusing activity in areas not monitored, intensifying disruptions elsewhere. The presence seemed aware of these efforts, resisting control and amplifying its dominance. Community awareness grew as neighbors and local authorities documented events. Reports of loud crashes, moving objects, and unexplainable phenomena circulated. Some neighbors heard voices or observed shadows, while others refused to approach the property. The house became infamous in the local area, a residence where normal life could not exist, a place where fear ruled and curiosity became caution. Through it all, the Snedeker family remained vigilant. They documented every event meticulously, knowing that records might be their only defense against disbelief. They endured terror, sleeplessness, and physical threats with resilience. Yet the house's presence loomed constantly, a reminder that some forces defy explanation and resist control. No rational answer, no physical intervention, could restore the peace that the family had sought when they first arrived. By the time investigators completed their initial assessments, the Snedeker house had cemented itself as one of the earliest examples of a violent poltergeist case in the United States. Evidence, recordings, photographs, police statements, and meticulous family notes created a documented trail of phenomena that could not be dismissed. The house was alive in legend as well as reality, a place where the ordinary became impossible and fear was a constant companion. Even decades later, the story of the Snedeker family remains chilling. Their experiences, captured in documentation and retold in reports, became a reference point for later hauntings, including the famous Lutz case. The house on that quiet Connecticut lane stood as a symbol of pre-Lutz poltergeist terror, intelligent, malevolent, and unsolved. The family's courage, endurance, and meticulous record-keeping left a legacy of evidence for those who would study the unexplained. The Snedeker home was no longer simply a building. It had become a crucible of fear, a place where the line between ordinary life and the paranormal dissolved. The family had endured shadows, whispers, flying objects, and physical attacks. Yet no explanation could fully account for the terror they lived with. The presence, whatever it was, had announced itself, and the house had become a permanent chapter in the history of American hauntings, unresolved, terrifying, and unforgettable. Even after months of terror, the disturbances in the Snedeker home showed no signs of abating. If anything, the house had grown more aggressive, more intelligent, more deliberate. The family lived in a state of perpetual unease, where each sound, shadow, or unexpected movement could signal another confrontation with the invisible force that had claimed their home. Doors slammed with increasing force, some so loud that the windows shook. Chairs and small tables were hurled across rooms, narrowly missing family members. Books flew from shelves as if tossed by an invisible hand, and lamps toppled without reason. The family's own presence seemed to provoke activity. Even minor movements could trigger objects to leap or slide across the floor. It became clear that the entity, whatever it was not random. It was observant, aware, and deeply engaged with those it haunted. The children were terrorized daily. Tommy, now hyper-aware of shadows and noises, refused to sleep alone, often curling against his mother in the living room. Margaret, once brave enough to confront minor disturbances, now hid under blankets, muttering prayers. Samuel, though older, still experienced the weight of unseen pressure. Objects thrown, whispers close to his ear, and shadows stretching across hallways with malicious intent. Fear had become the family's constant companion, invading every corner of their once promising home. The family's attempts at protection had only limited success. Salt lines placed around doors and windows were sometimes disrupted without explanation. Candles and lamps would extinguish unexpectedly. Prayers offered no consistent relief, though at times the disturbances would briefly pause, as if acknowledging the family's efforts, and then resuming with greater intensity once attention waned. The house was not merely a backdrop. It had become a participant, reacting to the family, learning patterns, and asserting dominance. Investigators returned repeatedly, now using more sophisticated equipment for the era. Cameras positioned to capture movement, early audio recorders to capture whispers, thermometers to document sudden temperature drops, and notepads for meticulous observation. One investigator described a chilling experience while observing a darkened hallway. A shadow, taller than any of the children, slowly moved along the wall, its edges indistinct, its motion deliberate. When approached, the shadow dissolved into darkness, leaving a cold emptiness in its wake. The investigator noted that the presence seemed aware of observation, almost defying attempts at rational documentation. Physical attacks escalated. Lamps shattered, objects flew with precision, aimed near or at the family, and doors slammed violently with sufficient force to injure. The children occasionally woke with scratches or bruises that bore no natural explanation. Even routine activities, eating, dressing, or reading, were interrupted by sudden disruptions. The house had become a battlefield, its unseen occupant challenging the family's every attempt at normalcy. Local authorities remained involved, though their responses varied. Police officers called to investigate reported loud crashes, flying objects, and sudden temperature drops. Some felt a palpable sense of being watched or even pushed. One officer admitted to a feeling of dread while standing in the hallway, convinced that he was not alone. Despite their rational training, the officers could not fully account for what they witnessed, and many left the property shaken and silent. Community awareness continued to grow. Neighbors whispered about strange lights in windows, loud crashes in the middle of the night, and the unmistakable aura of fear surrounding the house. Some dared to approach, curious to see for themselves, only to flee in alarm when shadows moved unexpectedly or objects shifted without contact. Others avoided the Snedeker property entirely, convinced that it was cursed or that evil dwelled there. Rumors of a haunted household spread quickly, adding social isolation to the psychological strain already endured by the family. The family continued documenting everything meticulously. They recorded the time, location, witnesses, and nature of each incident. They photographed object placements before and after disturbances, measured temperature anomalies, and made note of the children's reactions. These records, combined with investigator notes, created a compelling archive of events. For the first time, it became clear that the Snedeker case would not be dismissed as imagination or misfortune. There was a pattern, consistency, and intelligence behind the phenomena that demanded recognition. One chilling episode occurred late one night when Anna Snedeker was alone in the kitchen. She heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, though no one else was in the house. The temperature plummeted, and a shadow stretched along the floor toward her. Suddenly, a heavy pan lifted from the counter and crashed at her feet. She screamed, and the children, awakened by her cry, rushed to her side. The presence seemed to recede momentarily, only to return with renewed intensity hours later. Sleep deprivation was a constant struggle. The children often slept together, seeking safety in numbers, while the parents endured nights of half-sleep, heart racing, anticipating the next eruption of activity. The house's influence extended beyond the physical, affecting their emotional and mental well-being. Anxiety, fear, and exhaustion became pervasive, eroding patience and testing the family's unity. Even mundane tasks like cooking, cleaning, or reading were overshadowed by the constant anticipation of the next incident. Investigators began to recognize patterns in the activity. Cold spots often followed family members as they moved through the house. Shadows shifted in response to attention, and objects moved with apparent intelligence. Audio recordings captured whispers that sometimes seemed to answer questions or repeat names. Photographs occasionally revealed indistinct forms, suggesting movement or presence where none should exist. The activity was deliberate, responsive, and undeniably intelligent, far surpassing the bounds of ordinary poltergeist reports. The family's psychological toll became evident. The children, especially, were deeply affected. Margaret developed nightmares so vivid that she would awaken screaming, trembling, or crying. Tommy sometimes refused to leave his bed, convinced that the shadows would harm him. Even Samuel, older and usually stoic, experienced fear-induced anxiety, his concentration and sleep disrupted. Martin and Anna found themselves constantly vigilant, watching for signs of disturbances, checking corners, and reassuring the children. Yet no matter their attention, the house seemed to act independently, challenging their authority and instilling dread. The Snedeker case became a reference point for early American poltergeist phenomena. Investigators, journalists, and historians documented the events, recognizing the significance of a haunting with physical manifestations, multiple credible witnesses, and consistent documentation. Unlike folklore or isolated anecdotes, the Snedeker haunting bridged the gap between legend and verifiable occurrences. Evidence existed: recordings, photographs, police statements that could not be easily dismissed. As time went on, the story of the Snedeker family spread beyond Connecticut. Paranormal enthusiasts, researchers, and eventually media programs referenced the case as an early example of poltergeist activity in the United States. The events predated the famous Lutz haunting by decades, yet shared striking similarities: intelligent disturbances, shadowy forms, physical attacks, and the psychological toll on the family. The Snedeker home became a template for understanding later hauntings, illustrating patterns of intelligent, malevolent activity. By the end of this period, the Snedeker family had become experts in endurance, documentation, and vigilance. They lived under constant threat, yet refused to abandon their home immediately, hoping for understanding or reprieve. The house had proven its sentience, its intelligence, and its persistence. Each day, each night, was governed by the invisible presence that had claimed their lives. Even decades later, the legacy of the Snedeker haunting endures. Their meticulous documentation, combined with early investigator records, left a trail of evidence that continues to inform paranormal research. The home remains a symbol of pre-Lutz poltergeist terror, violent, intelligent, and unresolved. The Snedeker family's courage, endurance, and attention to detail ensured that their story would survive, a chilling reminder that some forces exist beyond explanation, and that some homes can never truly be safe. The house, now infamous in legend, stood as a reminder of the thin line between ordinary life and the inexplicable. The family endured shadows, whispers, flying objects, and physical attacks, evidence of a presence that defied rational understanding. Their experiences, captured in photographs, notes, and recordings, cemented the Snedeker home as one of the earliest documented cases of violent poltergeist activity in America. And though the family eventually left, the tale of their ordeal lingers, whispered through generations, studied by researchers, and remembered by those who dare to listen to the stories of homes where the ordinary is overcome by the extraordinary, and fear becomes a permanent resident. Even after the Snedeker family left the Connecticut house, the shadow of their ordeal lingered. The property, though emptied of its human occupants, seemed imbued with a presence that refused to dissipate. Locals continued to report strange occurrences: doors opening and closing, objects shifting, and faint, unintelligible whispers drifting through the hallways. The house had become more than a home. It had transformed into a landmark of terror, a nexus of unexplained activity, and a symbol of the delicate boundary between the ordinary and the paranormal. For the Snedeker family, life after the haunting was profoundly altered. The children, scarred by months of terror, carried memories of shadows at the foot of their beds, objects flying through the air, and the oppressive cold that seemed to follow them. Sleep remained a fragile, anxious experience. Tommy, once a cheerful boy, now feared the dark, flinching at sudden noises or shifting shadows. Margaret, burdened with nightmares that persisted long after leaving the house, developed a constant vigilance, a sense that unseen eyes were always observing. Samuel, older and more resilient, struggled with lingering fear and anxiety. The memory of flying objects and malevolent shadows seared into his mind. The parents, Martin and Anna, bore the weight of both trauma and responsibility. They had lived through unrelenting fear, witnessing their children suffer while struggling to protect them. The meticulous records they kept, notes, photographs, and later, testimony, became their anchor, a way to prove the reality of their experience when neighbors, friends, and even some investigators questioned the events. They faced disbelief, skepticism, and judgment from those who could not imagine the severity of what they had endured. Despite leaving the house, the family could not escape the notoriety of their story. Newspapers, local historians, and early paranormal enthusiasts chronicled the events, often dramatizing them for readers. Journalists interviewed the Snedekers, attempting to reconstruct the sequence of phenomena: objects hurled across rooms, doors slamming violently, shadows moving with intelligence, whispers that answered questions, and the constant psychological strain on the children. The family's detailed documentation lent credibility to the reports, setting the Snedeker haunting apart from mere folklore or sensationalism. Investigators revisited the site after the family's departure, hoping to capture further evidence or understand the force at work. Reports continued. Cold spots, subtle object movement, and the occasional creaking or whispering that defied explanation. Though the family was no longer present, the house remained active, a lingering testament to the intensity of the phenomena. Paranormal researchers regarded the Snedeker home as a foundational case, a rare documented example of sustained poltergeist activity with physical manifestations and multiple witnesses. In historical context, the Snedeker haunting gained significance as a precursor to later, more widely known cases, including the infamous Lutz family haunting that inspired the Amityville horror. Researchers noted striking similarities: intelligent disturbances, shadowy figures, objects moving with purpose, and the psychological toll on families. Yet the Snedeker case remained less sensationalized, perhaps because it predated mass media coverage. Yet it was no less profound in demonstrating the patterns and potential dangers of poltergeist activity. The family's experience also highlighted the psychological ramifications of living with the unexplained. Chronic fear, sleep deprivation, and repeated exposure to threatening phenomena had lasting effects. The children's behavior was forever altered. Their sense of safety was shattered, and they carried the invisible scars of months spent in an environment where every shadow might conceal danger. Martin and Anna, though pragmatic and resilient, grappled with the knowledge that their home had been overtaken by forces beyond comprehension, forces that they could neither fight nor fully understand. The Snedeker haunting served as a case study for early 20th century paranormal investigation. It demonstrated the importance of meticulous documentation, multiple witnesses, and corroborating evidence. Investigators and researchers noted the intelligence displayed by the poltergeist activity. Objects moved deliberately, shadows appeared in patterns, and disturbances often responded to the family's or investigators' attention. This suggested a sentience, or at least an adaptive awareness, rarely captured in other accounts. As years passed, the story of the Snedeker family became woven into the fabric of American paranormal history. The house on that quiet Connecticut lane became a symbol of sustained poltergeist activity, not merely ghostly sightings or fleeting shadows, but a residence where fear, intelligence, and physical manifestation converged. The case influenced countless investigations, guiding both amateur and professional paranormal researchers in recognizing patterns of intelligent disturbance and the importance of multiple, credible witnesses. The legacy extended beyond investigation. It became a cautionary tale of the psychological and social costs of enduring prolonged supernatural events. Families facing similar disturbances drew parallels, recognizing the emotional strain, fear, and disruption that could permeate daily life. The Snedeker experience demonstrated that poltergeist phenomena were not harmless curiosities. They could alter behavior, mental health, and family dynamics in lasting ways. Cultural memory preserved the haunting as well. Folklore, local history, and early publications chronicled the events with a mix of awe and fear. Later generations reading the accounts could sense the palpable tension, the terror of living under constant threat, and the helplessness of a family confronted with an unseen adversary. The story of the Snedeker family became a touchstone for understanding the human side of haunting, the psychological endurance, the terror of the unknown, and the need for rigorous documentation when confronting the inexplicable. Even today, the Snedeker haunting resonates. Paranormal enthusiasts, historians, and curious visitors reflect on the accounts, attempting to imagine the daily reality of a family living under intelligent, malevolent pressure. The house itself, whether still standing or remembered through records, represents a space where ordinary life was disrupted by extraordinary forces, and where human courage and resilience met an adversary beyond comprehension. The enduring question remains, what exactly haunted the Snedeker home? Was it a poltergeist in the traditional sense, an intelligent, localized force responding to emotions and attention? Was it a spirit or a residual imprint of past events? Or was it something else entirely, beyond the limits of human understanding? The family never received a definitive answer, yet their experience left behind compelling evidence, meticulous records, photographs, investigator testimony, and a haunting legacy that informed all subsequent studies of intelligent paranormal activity. Ultimately, the Snedeker family survived, though forever changed. Their story stands as a testament to resilience in the face of fear, the courage to document the inexplicable, and the enduring power of a house that refused to be ordinary. The terror they endured continues to educate, warn, and fascinate, a chilling reminder that some forces, once awakened or present, cannot be ignored, and that fear, as much as courage, shapes the legacy of those who face the unknown. The Snedeker home and the family who lived through it left an indelible mark on the history of American hauntings. It serves as a bridge between folklore and documented poltergeist activity, a precursor to later famous cases, and a narrative that continues to challenge understanding. Shadows, whispers, and flying objects are more than stories. They are evidence of a phenomenon that refuses to be neatly explained, reminding us that the line between the natural and the supernatural can be fragile, permeable, and terrifyingly real. And so the tale lingers, passed down through accounts, investigations, and retellings, a story of a family who could not escape evil, a house that defied logic, and a haunting that remains unresolved. The Snedeker family's ordeal, once confined to a quiet Connecticut lane, endures in the annals of paranormal history, immortalized as one of the first documented physically violent and psychologically harrowing poltergeist cases in America.